Hey, have you ever thought about the possibility that just as humans, that is, individual people, can have restrictions imposed on their legal personality, such as with children, for example? Similarly, a company can also have legal personality without having limited liability. So, I'm going to explain this statement to you in a moment, but the main take home message from this video is that a company can definitely exist without limited liability, and this is regardless of the fact that, as I have explained in another video, that limited liability is simply a logical consequence of having a separate legal personality. If you are very confused by this point, then I would refer you to that other video first of all, so that you are clear about the link between separate legal personality and limited liability. So here on the screen you can see a link that I've shared to that other video where I explain the link between these two concepts. For now, coming back to this video, which explores the concept of unlimited liability companies. Let me give a very simple example to explain the statement that I began the video with. So first of all, recall the fact that until you turn 18, you cannot enter into contracts, and this restriction on a human being, that is an individual person, is imposed by the law. So basically, when I stated at the beginning of this video that just as humans can have restrictions imposed on their legal personality, this simply referred to the fact that in the eyes of the law, a minor, that is somebody who is under 18, or in some countries the legal age is sometimes 17 or 16, so that varies from country to country, but for now the concept is that a person is not allowed to enter into contracts until they reach a certain age, and this restriction on their freedom to enter into contracts and do a lot of other things as well, by the way, is imposed by the law, right? So the law can impose certain restrictions on an individual human being even though they are considered as a separate person, obviously, despite the fact there are certain restrictions imposed on human beings sometimes, right? So this is just one example, that is, until you reach a certain age, you're considered as a minor and you're not allowed to enter into contracts, for example. So just like a natural legal person, that is an individual human being, can have certain restrictions imposed on their legal personality, similarly a company, even though it is given separate legal status, that is, it is recognized as having a separate legal personality by the law, so as far as the law is concerned, generally a company is no different from a person, that is an individual person. Why? Because an individual person is considered as a natural legal person and a company is considered as an artificial legal person. But after recognizing the fact that a company is an artificial legal person and not a natural legal person like you and I, after recognizing this simple fact, the law says that now the company and a human being, that is an individual person, are one and the same. So in the eyes of the law, there is no difference between these two entities. To put it very simply, a company is an artificial person whereas individual people are natural persons, and the law treats persons in the same way whether they are artificial or natural. Okay, so as far as the law is concerned, the company, even though it's an artificial person and not a natural person, is bound by the same laws, that is the same rules and regulations that an individual person is bound to. So to recall, we have already studied that just as a human being, just as an individual person can go bankrupt, similarly a company can also incur liabilities to such an extent that it cannot repay the amount that it owes to the creditors. So in these kinds of situations, a company can also be considered to go bankrupt just like an individual person can. So it follows from this that just like an individual person can own assets, can own property, similarly a company can also not only own property and assets, but similarly a company can also be responsible for its own debts. And what this means is that a company is logically always going to have limited liability, that is, a company is always going to be responsible for its own debts, just like a person is always responsible for their own debts. So if a person goes bankrupt, the law is not going to ask the neighbors to repay the debts, or the friends or the family members. The person himself or herself is going to be personally liable for the debts. Similarly, a company, when it cannot repay its debts, does not mean that the shareholders are going to be made personally liable. Instead, the company itself alone is going to be responsible to repay the debts. So, as I explained in the other video, this is why we say that limited liability is a logical consequence. So, you might be thinking by this point in the video that it's not possible that a company exists, that is, a company has this separate legal personality, and then it does not have limited liability. So it might seem like a contradiction in terms to say that a company can exist without limited liability. And this is precisely why I gave that other example of children. So for example, human beings, even though they do have a legal personality obviously, but just as the law can impose certain restrictions on human beings, so for example, you cannot drive until you reach a certain age, or you cannot have alcohol in certain countries where it is allowed, or if your religion permits it. So until you reach a certain age, you cannot do certain things. This is a restriction imposed by the law, even though every human being, each individual does definitely have a separate legal personality. We are all natural legal persons, but despite this, the law has the power to impose these restrictions on you, right? So similarly, even though a company always exists with limited liability as a matter of fact, as a matter of logical consequences, however, despite that, the law has the power to do whatever it wants to do, and therefore there is a possibility that we can have a company that does have that separate legal personality, yet it does not have that logical consequence of limited liability, and these kinds of companies are known as an unlimited company. And in another video, I do talk about these kinds of companies, that is unlimited liability companies, in detail. So if you're unclear about why such companies would exist, because I do understand that it would be pretty confusing to imagine why a company would choose to have unlimited liability, because isn't this the very reason that one would prefer to form a company? So do watch that other video, because over there I explain the fact that such kinds of companies are very rare, and usually a company does not become an unlimited company by choice, but that the government, that is the state, usually forces some companies to be registered as unlimited liability companies. So do watch that other video if you want to explore this concept in more detail.